Well, everyone, the industry buzz this week is that EA are actually trying to be acquired. Yep, apparently Andrew Wilson is out looking for suitors to acquire Electronic Arts, which certainly is quite the thing. Obviously, Bethesda. We've got Bungie being acquired by Sony. That's only a few of the massive acquisition stories, all while Embracer Group is going on, just gobbling up companies, big ones like Gearbox, and a lot of smaller ones that people won't have heard of.
Yeah, everyone's sitting thinking, you know, in the next 4, 5, maybe 10 years, will every video game come out of 5 different companies? And especially now that EA are kind of looking, yeah, it genuinely looks that way. You've got indies, then Embracer and Tencent and Microsoft, and that's about it, really.
Yeah, it's getting funky. So the primary suitor, we think anyway, is actually NBC Universal.
It was, yes.
Was. So I suppose any hopes of going to the Battlefield theme park ride at Universal Studios are dashed. Apparently they were top of the list, but that is a deal that actually fell apart over structure and price.
Yeah, and that was supposed to be like a proper merger where it's like, oh hey, Comcast are going to take NBC Universal and jam them inside EA, and then they'll make this new super company that Wilson wanted to be on top of.
Yeah.
But structure and price. Maybe EA were asking too much because EA definitely think they're worth a lot of money. Or maybe they're like, Wilson, you don't get to control everything. Who knows?
Yeah, when you think about EA, what are the successes? It's FIFA, it's Apex.
Yeah, everything else is kind of just... It's there, I guess. Battlefield's a flop. Sims is doing okay, but where's Sims 5? That kind of stuff. So, like, all of their eggs are in those 2 baskets, realistically. Because even all those Star Wars games are like, they're fine, but they're not making $1 billion a year like their other properties are.
Yeah, unfortunately for us. Because, yeah, they're great games.
Yeah.
So that's essentially then the thought. Now, of course, this is also the year where FIFA is going to be not called FIFA anymore. It'll be called EA Sports FC.
Yeah, which is...
certainly does reduce the name recognition. People don't call it EA FIFA. They call it FIFA. Now, I don't think that's because... Well, FIFA are a bit of a sketchy organization themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
So it depends where the brand goes and what awareness is like.
Yeah.
But still, the point is EA are not humongously diversified, and they've had so many flops. They've completely misused BioWare for years. They've completely misused DICE. They've squandered so many of their resources. They don't look like the most acquirable bunch given their problems, but what do I know about that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's exactly that case of, have all of their successes been accidents? Is that kind of what happened? Because obviously Apex was, hey, cancel Titanfall 3 and make a battle royale, and then Respawn did all the heavy lifting and made it a great game. Same with FIFA, where I don't think that, it would be hard to get that wrong.
Captive market.
Yeah, it's the market that they just are, in chains in Ultimate Team. So it's like they could put all that at risk, I think. But yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, for why they would want to do this, Activision, they've been acquired. Ubisoft, well, the Guillemets are basically trying to acquire themselves with some private equity, basically so that they could take Ubisoft private and retain control. And many other things as well in the M&A space. Yeah. So, maybe EA are looking a bit left out, but more realistically, also, there's everything that they could get in terms of, like, IP, development assets, distribution channels, all of that shit, with some of these really, really big mergers.
Yeah, that's the thing we've kept saying, is everyone wants developers. Activision just consistently buying tons and tons of developers. Embracer are buying every developer they can feasibly afford, which is a lot of them, basically all of them. Microsoft are like, yeah, we'll buy Activision, we'll buy Bethesda, we'll buy everyone who can make games for us. Even Sony are doing that. They're doing it in like a more tightly controlled way. But they are still just going, we need more games. And that's the thing where you can't make more games unless you have more developers. You can't make more games unless you have more money. And that's where EA are probably like, because I know Wilson was talking, or apparently Wilson was in some of these talks before the Activision buyout. But it's very much like everyone in the industry at the same time went, shit, we're not making enough games. So that's maybe a good thing, but...
Well, I think this is something that naturally happens in markets. There's always a period of consolidation. Even Codemasters acquired by EA, right? And they're reshuffling things for Need for Speed. They're probably seeing the sorts of things you can do whenever you're actually able to to spend the money on those big acquisitions. But it's not only NBC Universal. Actually, they've went to Disney, Apple, and Amazon.
Yeah, apparently.
Now, that is quite interesting. Of course, Disney had an interesting time, let's just say, with video games. They do seem more interested in video games now. They are beginning to find some success in their whole plan of licensing out Star Wars. EA did have the exclusive Star Wars license. Of course, that's no longer an exclusive thing. EA still do have their successful properties. You still do have weird situations, though. Battlefront 2, they fix that up, and then they just leave it dry.
Yeah.
It always really just puzzled me seeing that game doing pretty well. Like, whenever you see the most played games on, on the Xbox dashboard or whatever, just think like, wow, they're not making more content for that. But they turned it around. What? Doesn't really make that much sense. But I guess then it comes down to the very simple thing of development resources. That's a game made by DICE. DICE also do Battlefield. And oh dear, we all know what's been going on with Battlefield.
Exactly.
Now, for other Disney things, I mean, there's Kingdom Hearts in gaming. There's Disney Speedstorm.
Yeah.
A battle racing crossover by the very original game developers, Gameloft.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I think Disney are like, this kind of makes sense to me a little bit, except for the fact that EA and Disney have been, I mean, obviously with, Jedi and Jedi Survivor coming soon, they've been kind of happy enough there, but for all that time, it definitely seems like there wasn't enough Star Wars games happening for them. But I think back to the days that I kind of enjoyed where Disney were just pumping out shovelware all the time. Back in the days of like the Wii and the DS or like the PS2, and there's a Disney game on every platform for every property. And you wonder where those days have went. So maybe they're kind of looking a little bit back into that. Maybe, but I guess I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, then we've got Apple, which Apple is a weird one, to be honest, right? So you got to wonder then, would FIFA Ultimate Team work? It doesn't feel particularly Apple-like.
I think Apple have said something to the effect of they're against like predatory monetization. And I think if you put Ultimate Team in there, then that's everyone immediately goes, but you said you wouldn't do this, and then they have to deal with that. So I think Apple are likely to kind of go, no, we'll just not bother.
I suppose one would maybe wonder, would they try to roll that into an Apple Arcade? Would there be a more premium Apple Arcade? If you had an Apple One subscription, would you get EA Play?
Yeah.
But EA Play is already in other things, right? So that all seems a bit weird. Also, with a bunch of EA stuff being in the Frostbite engine, good luck getting that onto M1. Of course it's possible, but the engine barely seems to hold it together under normal circumstances. Yep, so sure. Apple is a strange one. And then as for Amazon, well, Amazon definitely want to get into games, though there's maybe some rumblings that they're not perfectly happy with the amount of money that Twitch is making, and they've had an extremely mixed track record themselves. So why not just fucking buy EA?
Yeah,
I guess they could certainly afford it. It's Amazon.
Yeah, just sorry, we're bad at making games. We'll buy someone who's EA are okay at making games, maybe not good, but just buy those people and then sorted. But that's the thing of it's really hard to know. Hard to know if Amazon would want to do that because they seem so devoted to their own division that it would make sense, but it definitely feels like these people aren't coming to EA. This is Andrew Wilson going and saying, hey everyone, please buy us or please merge with us. Here's everything we can offer you. Here's what we'll gain from you. Here's what, using your capital and your IP, what we can do, which is very much different to being on sale and wanted by a lot of people, which I think makes it probably difficult for any of these mergers to happen anytime soon. But I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, so for stuff from the company, well, a recent bit of news is actually upwards of 200 layoffs in support staff. That's across Texas and Ireland. So they're outsourcing some customer service there. And I think just an interesting little thing, actually, from the former editor of Edge magazine.
Yeah, he's going to know a lot of things.
Yes, so we bring it up because he's going to know a lot, and it's pretty scathing. And this is what he wrote in the wake of this news. And, we're pundits, but often guys like this have some connections. They know things the general public maybe don't know. So for him, EA's track record under Wilson's stewardship does not make for flattering reading. The acquisition of PopCap, that's the Plants vs. Zombies people, The thinking person's favorite casual game developer and relentless hitmaker until EA came along has been a disaster. Yeah, you don't hear about PopCap much anymore.
You don't hear about Bejeweled. You don't hear about Peggle. You don't hear about Plants vs. Zombies. They tried to make a Plants vs. Zombies Battlefield kind of game, and that went a wee bit... I think it was okay, like, received in terms of how good it was, but it just kind of didn't really, you know...
It's not Plants vs.
No one cared.
Yeah.
No one cared. It wasn't a PopCap game. It was like, okay, whatever. And they've just done nothing notable since.
Yep, and then what's funny is that sort of Bejeweled style game format has went to wild success. Other developers, such as King with Candy Crush. Ouch. Then, an attempt to do an Ubisoft and get all global game studios working in Frostbite was a catastrophe.
We've talked about that at length.
Origin trundles on invisibly. EA Play subscription service was so uncompelling it was folded into Game Pass. That's an interesting way to frame that I hadn't typically heard, but I'm going to assume he knows things, and that's why he's framing it that way.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, there is precious little innovation at EA, no real creative leadership. I think that is completely obvious when you look at their recent output. It's been Respawn and then everyone else messing things up. Maybe BioWare is going to actually come in guns blazing with their lessons learned, but we just don't have evidence of that yet.
It seems very much that to succeed at EA, you succeed despite EA. That's what Respawn have kind of done, where it's like EA's practices. I mean, EA are the studio killers for a reason. They just seem to not be able to manage studios correctly. And now that they actually are kind of doing reasonably okay with Respawn, that's because they seem to have went, Vince Zampella knows what he's doing. Let's not fuck with that. And that's a valid way to run a studio, but it's not exactly very inspiring, is it?
Yes, and it's quite funny that so much of what puts Laura Miele in the headlines is her talking about Respawn knowing what to do and trying to apply that to the rest of the company.
Yeah.
Like, that is just quite funny.
For sure, yeah.
So with EA, really, it's just a bunch of cash cows right now. That means that one day, whether it be via legislation, consumer burnout, there's a lot of risk. If FIFA Ultimate Team declines 30%, that is a humongous hit to Electronic Arts.
Yeah, this is even the thing. What if FIFA, obviously they said they're making a competitor of their own, but imagine if FIFA just went over to Konami and said, do you want to call Pro Evo or whatever, eFootball, do you want to call that FIFA now? And Konami are like, sure. Then people go into the shop and ask for FIFA and they get the box of FIFA and that's eFootball instead. But obviously they'll notice, right?
Yeah, let's hope they don't look at what the last eFootball looked like.
Well, that's the fun thing. No one's really talked about this whatsoever, and I need to look a little bit deeper into it. But I saw it was, I can't remember who it was. One of the writers at VGC is a big fan of football games and looked at eFootball's recent patch and is like, this is actually genuinely a good patch. This has fixed a lot of what obviously eFootball was a laughingstock and rightfully so, but they're actually like doing the right thing here and they're making this game go in a good direction. It's still not a good game, but it's like, I think EA may be resting on their laurels a little bit because if eFootball can kind of a little bit come back, then it's not FIFA versus eFootball. It's EA Sports FC, which isn't a great name, versus eFootball.
When did eFootball come out?
It was ages ago now, I think.
Because I have Steam charts up here. And it's very interesting. So the 1st of October 2021, you got 9,000 people.
Yeah.
And then it just flatlines around 1,000 people a day, right, for many months. But then April 15th, the number picks up again to 9,700.
I think that might have been around the patch.
And it's actually done. If I go to the 1 month chart, it's definitely slipping off recently, but it actually seems to have had a little resurgence there.
Yeah.
These numbers are better than Battlefield 2042.
For sure. Yeah. They basically redesigned a whole bunch of the game, and they had this really, really well written post on their patch notes site going, here's the 1.0. And everyone's like, holy shit, yeah, maybe they're not going to make waves, but they're certainly trying. And if I were EA Sports FC developers, I'd maybe be like, we really need to try this time. But I don't know if they have the ability to try.
Well, for the longest time, wasn't it that people really felt that the actual game was captured better by PES?
In the entirety of the PS2 era, which is probably when I was playing football games,
okay, so that could've changed.
It was always very much Pro Evo was the better football game, but FIFA had all the names. And obviously, EA are going to keep a lot of those names and contracts and stuff like that just out of the purview of FIFA. But if that ever changes, then their $1.5 billion a year, according to Nathan Brown, could be in the bin. Or they could lose that to Konami of all people, which would be really, really embarrassing.
That'd be hilarious. Right. So overall, there's a bit of fragility in EA.
Yeah.
Now, we do see pretty good growth opportunities. We've got Apex Mobile, especially taking off in Japan. Probably going to do well enough worldwide. We've got the new Jedi game, which is almost certainly going to be excellent.
Yep.
We have a potential timeline forming where Vince and sort of Respawn-ish people are able to go over to DICE and basically fix up Battlefield. So there is a timeline. And then, of course, the new Dragon Age, the new Mass Effect, those come online, benefiting from A, way more experience and development in Frostbite, B, way more time, and I think C, a humongous humbling incident.
Yeah.
So we're not completely down and out in EA here. It's just that right now they are in a little bit of a dry spell, especially with Battlefield messing up twice in a row. And as for what this could basically mean for us, well, the consolidation wave in gaming is absolutely continuing. So expect that to continue. It's interesting that here EA actually wants to be a part of that as an acquiree. Potentially, though, more of a merger where Wilson would probably want a pretty high up position, you would think.
Yeah.
What that ultimately could mean, though, is access to more development resources and access to more IP.
Yep, that's what everyone wants. Everyone wants to do these mergers for that.
Yeah.
Specifically, you look at, Activision, Microsoft, that's Xbox going. Every time they talk about it to investors, it's we have all of Activision developers. We have all of Activision's IP. We have Bethesda's IP, Bethesda developers. Same for Embracer. They're like, we've got developers, we've got IP, we've got games coming out. Sony are like, we want IP, we want live service tools so we can scale. And EA are kind of just the same thing. Everyone wants IP and developers to make more games or at least more content.
Yeah. Now, my worry there is that turns into lots of very money-making live services that are maybe not in the best interests. Okay, they're in the best interests of a human brain that wants to be engaged and poked and prodded, but maybe not in the best interest of the overall human experience as forwarded by the art that is games.
Yeah.
And I think that is where the kind of big corporatization of things gets a little bit worrying. At least we hear good things about Embracer when it comes to them essentially being more of a holding company who are happy enough to delay games. They recently talked about that in regards to the Evil Dead game.
Yes.
Right? So the thing is that's good. And maybe that ends up being more resources, more IP, more money for the developers under Embracer. But then you kind of worry, well, what if we did have EA, NBC Universal?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Not that I think we're going to suddenly have fucking Jimmy Kimmel, the EA experience, like they did in the theme park. But I'd still worry about the sorts of things that would be greenlit in that context.
For sure, yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting because I think talking about Embracer is interesting because the way I kind of see it internally, in terms of how I frame it, is that everyone wants the live service. Everyone wants to be the main course. Everyone wants to be the one game that takes up all your time. And Embracer seem to understand that that's not the only market in games. They're like, oh, well, the market is definitely smaller and harder to kind of work with when you're making like I guess if you think about it like a restaurant menu, like the starters, the drinks, the desserts, EA and Activision and Microsoft are trying to make the flashiest mains. And Embracer are like, we'll just, whatever you don't want a main course, we'll cater to you with all our AA games.
Yeah, it's the power of Embracer and indies.
Yeah.
Right?
Indies
Filling in all the cracks. And I think the people who generally spend more time in that space are going to have a more just diversified gaming experience.
Yeah.
So, look, the bright side of this is perhaps it means that, like, big budget, real just, like, slick, good AAA blockbusters like Jedi, hopefully more of those are more possible. Perhaps we're in a world where so there's a difference between a platform holder's set of incentives and a third party. Third-party publisher is just going to need to bring the fucking money in, whereas you could perhaps say that Microsoft are a lot more willing to play the long game because they're a platform holder. They have a different set of incentives. Yeah. You could maybe say that some of the M&A activity could lengthen the time horizon of some of the decision-making.
Hopefully.
That is hopium. That is pure hopium. I think that's the best that it could be.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I'll say that this could mean a decent amount of like pretty good things for consumers in the next short period of time, but I'll definitely put my stake in the ground saying that consolidation certainly does get spooky when you think about things in the long term.
For sure.
And we have seen this accelerate so much. The gaming space is so much less diversified in terms of who actually owns what than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's definitely
That's a bit spooky.
Yeah, it's very concerning for consumers who kind of want more interesting things, but that's where I'm hoping Embracer keeps people covered. That's where I'm hoping indies keep people covered, especially when Microsoft are throwing Game Pass money at indies. So I'm hoping that keeps it there. But at least as far as the silver lining, I think, is if you're buying IP and you're buying developers, that means you're going to have more games or at least more content. So I think that's the one thing we've learned about, everyone's learned about live services is doesn't matter what the IP is, doesn't matter how good the game is, it needs to have content. It needs to be alive. So obviously you can, either manage your developers better to get more work out of less devs, or you can buy more devs. Hopefully they learn to do both, because at the minute they're going for the option B and that's not working. But
I suppose it is heartening that in a world where Marvel is dominating the box offices, the Avengers live service still basically fails.
Exactly,
and I don't mean that to be mean to people who like that IP or to be mean to the developers. It's just the point. People said no to the live service, right? I think there's like a little bit of hope in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing where like Halo, how do you feel making a Halo? You don't give it enough content to make people happy.
Just don't ship many, perhaps most of the features that people expect with Halo.
And also when there's a bug with guns jamming, don't fix it for 9 days. That also works.
Fog. Yeah. So there you go. We went a bit broad, but basically you know the situation now. Andrew Wilson is in the dating market. He is looking for a big beefy company with a lot of money to get in bed with. And who knows, maybe he does want to, as you said earlier, maybe he wants to come out on top as, some weird like EA merges with NBC Universal and Andrew Wilson is at the helm. Because right now, his comp is about 30 mil a year.
Yeah.
Oh, how big could you get it, Andy? Let's see.
Yeah. God King Wilson of gaming, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh man, there you go. That's it for us. Have a good day, everybody. Catch you next time.